Think about the most dangerous jobs in the world. You're probably picturing something obvious: a soldier in combat, a firefighter running into flames, a police officer chasing criminals. These are roles where danger feels expected, it's practically stitched into the uniform. But what if I told you that some of the safest seeming jobs, the ones you or someone you love might be doing right now, hide dangers so lethal they can kill you without warning? That's not an exaggeration. It's not a movie script. It's real. And tonight, I'm going to prove it. Imagine this. A quiet library at closing time. The kind of place where the loudest sound is a page turning. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. A librarian sits at her desk, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, a steaming cup of tea beside her. Everything about the scene is calm. Ordinary. Safe. But minutes later, that librarian would be found slumped over, unresponsive. At first, her coworkers thought she had simply fallen asleep after a long shift. But when they touched her shoulder, her skin was cold. Her tea, untouched. Her eyes, lifeless. And the cause of her death wasn't a heart attack, or a stroke, or anything anyone would expect in a library. It was the air itself. That's the terrifying part. None of the people you're about to hear about were chasing danger. They weren't thrill seekers, adrenaline junkies, or risk takers. They were ordinary workers. People who thought their jobs were boring, safe, routine. And yet, all three of them never made it home from a shift. Their stories force us to ask the question nobody wants to think about. If these jobs, the ones we take for granted as safe, can turn deadly, what does that mean about the routines we all live in every single day? Before I take you deep into these three chilling cases, the librarian, the janitor, and the museum guard, I need to ask you something. Backhand index pointing right if you've ever thought your job was safe, if you've ever assumed nothing bad could happen to you in your routine. I want you to stick with me to the very end. Because one of these stories will hit uncomfortably close to home. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button, not just because it supports this channel, but because these stories matter. These people's lives mattered. And remembering them might just change the way you see your own world. Now that you're here, let's take the first step into this unsettling journey. The first story begins in a place that feels almost sacred, the library. A space built for learning, quiet, and safety. But for one woman, her final chapter was written not in the books she loved, but in the very air around her. And once you hear how she died, you will never look at a safe building the same way again. The librarian's final chapter. Libraries are supposed to be sanctuaries. You walk in and immediately feel the calm, the scent of old paper, the whisper of pages, the soft tapping of keyboards. For most people, the library is one of the last truly safe places left in the world. For Margaret, we'll call her that, the library wasn't just safe, it was home. A life among books. Margaret was 47 years old, with a gentle smile and an endless love for stories. Growing up, she had been the kid who spent summers under a tree, nose buried in a book while the world played around her. By adulthood, she had turned that passion into her career, head librarian at a small-town branch. Her friends joked that she didn't just work at the library, she lived there. She knew every patron by name. She tucked handwritten notes into her favorite novels, little treasures for the next reader to find. And she believed in her bones that books could save lives the way they had saved hers. Her life was quiet, predictable, safe, until it wasn't. The ordinary day. It was a bitterly cold January evening. Outside, snowflakes stuck to the windows, muffling the world in silence. Inside, the library's furnace groaned under the strain of keeping the building warm. Margaret didn't think much of it. The furnace had been acting up for weeks, but it was nothing new. The town's maintenance budget was tight, and repairs always got delayed. She had grown used to the occasional rattle in the pipes, the uneven blasts of heat. By 8:45 p.m., the library was nearly empty. A couple of college students typing frantically on laptops. An older man thumbing through the newspaper. A mother coaxing her toddler to put away picture books. Margaret made her usual rounds, smiling, reminding people the library would close in 15 minutes. She checked the children's section, reshelved a misplaced mystery novel, and finally sat back down at her desk. That's when the first headache hit. The invisible threat. It was sharp, sudden, like a vice tightening around her temples. She rubbed her forehead, assuming it was just fatigue. She'd been there since 9 a.m., after all. But then came the dizziness. A wave of nausea. She leaned back in her chair, eyes fluttering. Unbeknownst to her, the furnace in the basement had cracked. And instead of warm air, it was pumping something else into the building, carbon monoxide. Colorless. Odorless. Silent. The perfect killer. The collapse. The students left. The mother ushered her child out. The older man returned his paper. By 9 p.m., Margaret was alone in the library. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Her tea spilled across the desk, the steam rising into the dim fluorescent light. When her assistant arrived 10 minutes later to lock up, they found her slumped over, her reading glasses still perched on her nose, as if she had simply fallen asleep mid-sentence. But when they shook her shoulder, she didn't stir. And when they called her name, the only response was silence. The discovery. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. Margaret had been gone for minutes by the time they arrived. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged faint blue. At first, no one understood. She had been healthy. No history of illness. How could a woman who spent her life surrounded by books die so suddenly, so silently? It wasn't until the fire department checked the basement that the truth emerged. Levels of carbon monoxide were off the charts. One firefighter reportedly said, "If that assistant had stayed in the building 5 more minutes, we'd be pulling out 2 bodies instead of 1. The aftermath. The library shut down immediately. The town mourned. A framed photo of Margaret was placed at the front desk, her favorite quote written beneath it, "Books are proof that humans can work magic." But the hardest part wasn't the public grief. It was the private kind. Her sister said she couldn't stop imagining Margaret's final moments, the way she must have felt confusion, dizziness, and fear before the darkness came. Her mother whispered through tears, "She died doing what she loved. But she shouldn't have died at all." The haunting silence. When the library reopened weeks later, staff said it never felt the same. Some swore the air still carried a heaviness. Patrons noticed the silence differently, no longer comforting, but unsettling. And more than once, a late-night librarian reported glancing toward Margaret's old desk and seeing her teacup, perfectly placed, though no one had touched it. Was it imagination? Or something else lingering in the stacks? Margaret's story teaches us something chilling. Sometimes the deadliest danger is the one you can't see. The one you can't smell. The one you never even think to fear. She thought her library was the safest place in the world. But on that night, it wasn't. And as tragic as that is, hers isn't the only story. Because our second case, the one we'll dive into next, doesn't take place in a quiet library. It takes place in a shopping mall. A place buzzing with life by day, but at night, when the crowds vanish and the lights dim, it becomes something else entirely. The janitor's last shift. When a tragedy strikes, a community either heals together, or carries scars forever. For Margaret's town, her sudden death in the library left a mark that wouldn't fade. People walked into that building differently now. They noticed every creak in the pipes, every draft of air, every faint hum of the furnace. Parents held their children's hands tighter. Students, who once studied late into the night, now left before the sun went down. And the older patrons, the ones who'd known Margaret for decades, would pause by her photo at the front desk, whispering prayers under their breath before checking out their books. The library was open again, yes. But in many ways, it would never truly reopen. And yet, the unsettling truth is this: Margaret's story wasn't unique. Because danger has a way of hiding in plain sight. And just a few states away, in an entirely different kind of safe place, another life was about to be stolen in an equally horrifying, equally unexpected way. A job nobody notices. Every day, thousands of us walk through shopping malls without a second thought. Bright lights. Endless stores. Food courts filled with chatter. Music echoing faintly through wide hallways. We notice the sales. The window displays. Maybe the smell of pretzels or coffee. But you know who we don't notice? The janitors. They're the silent guardians of these places. Sweeping floors after thousands of footsteps. Emptying trash bins filled with crumpled receipts and soda cups. Mopping up spills before someone slips. It's hard work. Unappreciated work. But necessary. And for Anthony, let's call him that, it was more than a paycheck. Anthony's world. Anthony was 52 years old. A quiet man, divorced, with grown kids who lived out of state. His life was simple: work nights at the mall, watch baseball on his off days, call his daughter every Sunday. He wasn't the type to complain. His coworkers said he was reliable, always showing up, always staying late if needed. If there was one word people used for him, it was dependable. And there was something almost comforting about his routine. For Anthony, the mall after hours wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. He'd put in his earbuds, let classic rock fill his head, and mop the endless tile floors under the soft glow of fluorescent lights. The world was chaotic, but his shift? Predictable. Safe. Until one night, it wasn't. The final shift. It was late spring. The mall had closed at 9 p.m. By 9:30, the crowds had vanished, the stores had gone dark, and the once busy halls stood empty. Anthony clocked in, grabbed his cart, and began his routine, sweeping the east wing, then the central food court, then the quieter west hall. But around midnight, security cameras captured something unusual. Anthony's cart was left in the middle of the hallway, mop bucket full, rag draped over the side, as if he had just stepped away for a moment. Except, he never came back. The vanishing. When the morning crew arrived at 6 a.m., Anthony's cart was still there. His keys were still clipped to his belt. His radio, still on, crackled faintly from where he had dropped it on the floor. But Anthony himself? Gone. At first, management thought maybe he had gone home sick. But his car was still in the lot. His jacket still hung in the break room. His time card showed he never clocked out. Panic spread quickly. Police were called. And when they reviewed the surveillance footage, what they saw only deepened the mystery. The footage. In grainy black and white, Anthony could be seen pushing his cart down the long west wing hallway. He paused, looked over his shoulder, though the footage showed no one behind him, then pushed the cart a few more feet. At exactly 12:07 a.m., he stopped abruptly. Tilted his head slightly, as if listening. And then, he simply walked out of frame. He didn't run. He didn't look distressed. He just walked, calmly, as though someone had quietly called his name. That was the last time anyone ever saw him alive. The search. Police scoured the mall from top to bottom. Storage closets. Maintenance shafts. Rooftops. Even the dumpsters behind the food court. Nothing. K9 units were brought in. The dogs picked up Anthony's scent, but it stopped dead in the middle of the hallway where his cart had been left. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. For weeks, the community searched. Flyers went up. Local news covered the story. His daughter made tearful pleas on camera, begging anyone with information to come forward. But the leads were cold. No one had seen or heard anything. No one had an explanation. Theories. People began whispering theories. Abduction? But how could someone kidnap a grown man in a locked mall without a struggle, without being caught on camera? Accident? Could he have fallen into some hidden maintenance shaft? But the building had been searched exhaustively. Voluntary disappearance? But his bank account was untouched. His car unmoved. His ID and wallet were left behind. And then there were the darker theories. Some said the mall was built over old farmland with a history of unexplained vanishings. Others swore they'd heard strange noises late at night in those same hallways. A few even claimed Anthony's disappearance was tied to something not human. But no matter the speculation, the fact remained, a man had gone to work one night, doing one of the most ordinary jobs in the world, and he never came home. The family's grief. Anthony's daughter later admitted that the hardest part wasn't losing him. It was not knowing. She said, "If he had died in an accident, at least we could have buried him. But this? Every night, I wonder if he's cold. If he's scared. If he's still out there, calling for help." Her words haunted the community. Because deep down, everyone knew, it could have been any one of them. We all walk through malls. We all pass those long, sterile hallways. And sometimes, we don't realize how vulnerable we really are. Anthony's story was never solved. To this day, his case remains open. His daughter keeps his photo on the mantle, candles burning beneath it. And that unanswered question lingers like a shadow. What happened to the janitor on his last shift? If a man can vanish from a brightly lit mall under the unblinking eye of security cameras, then truly, nowhere is safe. But as unsettling as that is, the next story takes us to a place even more ordinary, even more safe. A quiet stretch of road. A familiar routine. And a worker whose job should have been one of the safest of all, until one night, it wasn't. The delivery driver's last ride. Some jobs come with risk warnings built in. Police officers. Firefighters. Soldiers. We know they face danger every day. But there are others, jobs we see all the time, so ordinary, so woven into our lives, that we forget they can carry danger too. One of those jobs is delivery driving. We order food, groceries, packages, and trust that someone we don't know will bring it right to our door. It feels routine. Invisible. Safe. But for Daniel, we'll call him that, one ordinary delivery turned into something out of a nightmare. A familiar routine. Daniel was 29. Newly married, working nights as a delivery driver to save for a house. He wasn't just doing it for the money, he genuinely liked the freedom of the job. Driving at night with the radio on, seeing parts of the city he'd never noticed before. His wife later said he was the kind of man who would go out of his way to bring an extra soda or napkins if a customer asked. He believed small acts of kindness mattered. And to him, nothing about that night seemed unusual. But it would be the last route he ever ran. The call. At 10:32 p.m., Daniel got an order from a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. A large house. Paid in advance. No special instructions except, "Please leave at the back door." That didn't strike him as odd. Plenty of customers preferred the back entrance. He grabbed the order, plugged the address into his GPS, and drove off. Cameras from a nearby gas station later showed his car pulling out of the lot. His taillights fading into the night. That's the last clear image anyone has of him. At 11:15 p.m., Daniel's wife texted him, "Almost done?" No reply. At 12:45 a.m., the restaurant called. He hadn't returned. His car hadn't been logged back at the lot. By 2 a.m., police were notified. The next morning, searchers found his car on the side of a dirt road about 3 miles from the delivery address. The driver's side door was cracked open. His phone was on the seat. The food was still in the bag. But Daniel himself? Nowhere. The investigation begins. Police descended on the house where the order had been placed. But here's the thing, the family inside claimed they never ordered anything. In fact, they were asleep when police knocked on their door. Someone had used a fake account to place the order, directing Daniel to a house that had nothing to do with them. But why? The trail. Investigators followed what little trail there was. His car had no signs of struggle. His phone had no suspicious calls or texts. The only detail that stood out came from a neighbor near the dirt road. They claimed they heard something unusual around 11:30 p.m., the sound of a car door slamming, followed by hurried footsteps in the gravel. But when they looked outside, the road was empty. The theories. Daniel's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. And soon, theories began to swirl. Robbery gone wrong? But his wallet, cash, and phone were left untouched. Targeted attack? But Daniel had no enemies, no debts, no disputes. Random act of violence? That was the most chilling possibility. That someone, somewhere, had lured him into the night for no reason at all. One detective said quietly, "It's as if the order wasn't for food, it was for him." The family's agony. Daniel's wife struggled to talk about him publicly. But when she finally did, her words broke hearts across the country. "I keep his number saved on my phone. Every night, I text him. I tell him I love him. Even though I know no one will ever answer." She said the silence was worse than anything. Because silence leaves room for imagination. And imagination is cruel. Months passed. No arrests. No new leads. The order had been traced back to a burner phone, bought with cash, never used again. Whoever orchestrated that night had vanished as completely as Daniel himself. Today, his photo still hangs on flyers around town. A smiling young man in a baseball cap, holding his wife close. A face frozen in time. And every time a delivery driver pulls up to a stranger's door late at night, there's a chilling reminder, not every order is safe. The connection. 3 people. 3 ordinary jobs. 3 lives cut short in ways no one could have predicted. A librarian poisoned by the invisible. A janitor who walked into thin air. A delivery driver lured to a trap. What ties them together isn't just tragedy. It's the illusion of safety. Because sometimes the places and routines we think are harmless, the places we trust most, are the ones that hide the deadliest dangers of all. And now I want to ask you, have you ever had a moment where something felt safe, until suddenly, it wasn't? Drop your stories in the comments below. Because every detail matters, and sometimes sharing what scares us most can keep someone else safe. And if you want more stories like this, strange, dark, and mysterious, don't forget to subscribe. Because while most jobs, most nights, most routines are safe, every now and then, one of them turns deadly. The ripple effect. Tragedy doesn't stop at the person it takes. It radiates outward, touching families, communities, and sometimes entire industries. When Margaret, the librarian, died from carbon monoxide poisoning, her small town didn't just lose a beloved figure. They lost their sense of trust in a building that had always been a safe haven. Parents pulled their children from story hours. College students stopped using the late-night study rooms. Even the sound of the furnace turning on made some staff flinch. One woman later said, "I never thought I could be afraid of silence. But now, every time I step into the library, that silence feels dangerous." The ripple effect was grief, yes. But also a new kind of fear. The mall's shadow. Anthony's disappearance in the mall was even more destabilizing. The mall wasn't just a shopping center, it was the heartbeat of that town. It was where teens hung out, where families spent weekends, where the elderly walked laps in the mornings. But after Anthony vanished, things changed. Shoppers whispered as they passed the West Wing where his cart had been abandoned. Some stores in that section reported dips in sales because customers refused to walk down that hallway. A few shop owners even requested to relocate their storefronts, saying the atmosphere had become cursed. And for the janitorial staff who still worked there, the routine never felt routine again. They'd walk their shifts looking over their shoulders, radios clutched in their hands, waiting for a voice that never came back. The empty seat at the table. For Daniel's family, the ripple wasn't just fear, it was absence. His wife described how she kept setting out 2 plates for dinner, even months after he was gone. She'd catch herself reaching for her phone to text him, only to remember he would never answer. The hardest part, she said, is knowing the world just kept moving. The deliveries didn't stop. The cars didn't stop driving. But my world ended that night. And no one else even noticed. His parents admitted they'd started leaving the porch light on every night, in case, somehow, he found his way home. The bigger picture. Each of these tragedies sparked a wider conversation. In Margaret's town, officials passed new safety codes requiring carbon monoxide detectors in all public buildings. But her family bitterly asked why it took her death to make that change. In Anthony's mall, corporate management quietly increased security, installing more cameras and adding patrols. But rumors spread that they weren't trying to protect customers, they were trying to avoid lawsuits. And in Daniels City, delivery drivers began demanding better safety protections, clearer identity verification for orders, emergency check-ins with dispatch, panic buttons built into apps. The tragedies didn't just ripple outward. They raised questions that couldn't easily be answered. Because here's the truth, the world isn't built to keep us perfectly safe. And sometimes, even the most ordinary spaces can become the backdrop for extraordinary loss. The lingering fear. But the strangest ripple effect wasn't grief or policy. It was superstition. In the library, patrons whispered that Margaret's spirit still lingered, warning others about the dangers unseen. In the mall, staff swore they heard footsteps at night when the building was empty, echoing near the spot where Anthony vanished. And in Daniels City, other drivers claimed to get ghost orders, deliveries placed to addresses that didn't exist, with instructions to leave food at the back door. Were these just coincidences? Or echoes of stories too powerful to die? The ripple effect teaches us something chilling: death isn't the end of a tragedy. It's the beginning of its shadow. And those shadows spread, across families, across towns, across industries, leaving behind not just grief, but fear. But as terrifying as the ripple effect is, it pales in comparison to what comes next. Because we dig into something deeper, the patterns behind these stories. The unsettling similarities. The thread that ties them all together. The pattern in the shadows. When three tragedies happen in three different places, years apart, the natural instinct is to treat them as separate. A freak accident. A mysterious disappearance. A random act of violence. But sometimes, when you look closely, separate tragedies start to rhyme. The first thread, routine. Margaret. Anthony. Daniel. At first glance, their lives couldn't be more different: a librarian, a janitor, a delivery driver. Different ages, different towns, different circumstances. But here's the first thread that ties them together: routine. Margaret trusted the hum of the furnace that had been rattling for years. Anthony trusted the quiet halls of the mall he'd walked 1,000 times. Daniel trusted the GPS directions that had guided him through hundreds of safe deliveries. They all leaned into the comfort of routine. And it was that very routine that betrayed them. The second thread, silence. Another connection is silence. Margaret's death came in a silent library, where no one noticed her final moments. Anthony vanished in an empty hallway, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by nothing. Daniel disappeared on a deserted road, the only witness a neighbor who heard quiet footsteps fading into the night. It wasn't screams or chaos that marked their ends. It was silence. The kind of silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The third thread, the lore. And then there's the lore. Margaret stayed late because she believed she was safe in her library. Anthony walked calmly out of frame, as though something, or someone, had called to him. Daniel followed GPS directions to a fake order that led him to nowhere. In each case, something ordinary pulled them in. Something they didn't question. Until it was too late. Theories begin to swirl. As these stories spread online, armchair detectives and true crime forums began to speculate. Was there a deeper connection? Some believe these tragedies were part of a disturbing trend, examples of how society overlooks the hidden dangers in safe jobs. They argued the stories weren't connected by person or place, but by theme, ordinary routines masking extraordinary risks. But others weren't so sure. Some claimed there were darker forces at play. The unsettling possibility. One chilling theory suggested that these weren't coincidences at all, but part of a pattern that had been happening for decades. Disappearances in workplaces. Sudden deaths in routine environments. Tragedies tied not to war zones or crime-ridden streets, but to places we assume are harmless. An eerie archive of stories emerged. A teacher who vanished from a locked classroom. A bus driver found slumped over his wheel with no cause of death. A factory worker who walked into a break room and never came back out. Were these just isolated tragedies? Or pieces of a puzzle too disturbing to acknowledge? The emotional undercurrent. For the families left behind, these theories were little comfort. Margaret's sister once said, "People keep asking if it was an accident. But that word doesn't help me. Because an accident means it didn't have to happen. And yet, it did." Anthony's daughter echoed that sentiment. "My dad walked out of frame, and no one knows why. I dream about that hallway every night. And I can't decide which is worse, that something took him, or that he just left." And Daniel's wife? She had the cruelest question of all. Did he know, in those last moments, that he wasn't coming home? The haunting realization. The truth is this: patterns are comforting because they suggest answers. But sometimes, the pattern only makes things scarier. Margaret, Anthony, Daniel, they remind us that safety is fragile. That silence can be deadly. That routine can betray us. And worst of all, that sometimes people vanish into ordinary spaces, and we're left with nothing but theories. So here's the question that lingers: are these just random tragedies? Or are they signs of something bigger, a pattern we haven't fully seen yet? Because if there is a pattern, then these stories aren't just about Margaret, Anthony, and Daniel. They're about all of us. And that realization leads us into the final act, where we confront what these tragedies mean for the way we live, the way we work, and the way we tell ourselves that everything is safe. The truth we can't ignore. We've walked through 3 lives. 3 ordinary people. 3 jobs everyone assumes are safe. And yet, each one ended in tragedy. Margaret, the librarian. Anthony, the janitor. Daniel, the delivery driver. They didn't step into danger knowingly. They didn't choose risky careers like firefighting, deep-sea diving, or bomb disposal. They chose quiet work. Predictable work. Safe work. And that's exactly what makes their stories so terrifying. The illusion of safety. We live in a world where we try to control chaos. Seatbelts. Security cameras. Workplace policies. We tell ourselves, if I avoid danger, if I stay in safe spaces, nothing bad will happen. But Margaret's story shatters that illusion. She was surrounded by books and silence, and the very air she breathed turned against her. Anthony's story shatters it again. He wasn't mugged in a back alley. He wasn't the victim of a late-night crime. He vanished in a brightly lit mall hallway, as if swallowed by the walls themselves. And Daniel? His story is the final blow. The very system designed to make his job easier, his GPS, his delivery routine, was twisted into a trap. The lesson is chilling: safety isn't a guarantee. And here's the part we often overlook: when tragedy strikes, it doesn't just take one person. It takes pieces of everyone who loved them. Margaret's sister still avoids libraries, unable to walk past the shelves without hearing the silence. Anthony's daughter hasn't set foot in that mall again. She says even the smell of cleaning supplies makes her stomach turn. Daniel's little boy keeps asking, when is Daddy coming home? And no one has the heart to explain that he isn't. Tragedy doesn't end with the victim. It echoes, through families, through communities, through time. The haunting takeaway. And so we're left with one undeniable truth. Even the safest jobs can carry deadly secrets. It's not meant to make us paranoid. It's not meant to keep us locked in our homes. But it is meant to remind us, life is fragile, and the things we take for granted can vanish in a blink. Why these stories matter. If you've stuck with me through this story, ask yourself, why? Why do we lean in when we hear about tragedies like these? Why do we sit in silence, our stomachs twisting, our minds racing? Because deep down, we're trying to make sense of it. We're trying to learn something from it. These aren't just horror stories. They're reminders to check on the people we love, to be present, even in ordinary moments, to never assume that tomorrow is guaranteed. So here's what I want to leave you with. If 3 ordinary jobs can end in such extraordinary tragedies, what does that say about the way we live our own lives? How many times do we walk into our routines, assuming we're untouchable? How many times do we take for granted the safe choices? And how would our lives change if we remembered, even for a moment, that safety is never absolute? If you felt the weight of Margaret's final breath, if you pictured Anthony walking into that hallway for the last time, if you imagined Daniel's wife waiting by the window, praying for headlights that never appeared, then don't let this story end here. Subscribe for more stories like this, not just to be entertained, but to be reminded of the fragile, haunting, human truths that sit just beneath the surface of everyday life. Share this video, because stories like these don't just belong to the families who live them, they belong to all of us. And most of all, hold your loved ones close. Because the scariest stories aren't the ones that happen far away. They're the ones that happen in places we thought were safe.